That's a very good question. The trouble with codes and standards is they're changing all the time. The New Zealand code is updated every year. They've just issued the July edition 2025, and they've reformatted it. Most of the changes are editorial. So it's kind of, well, we're kind of tidying up before we make some real changes to it. The other annoying thing about the New Zealand building code is what it does. It says, well, you can refer to this standard, but change that clause and cross out that figure and replace this table with this table. You can't be serious, but yeah, they do. So if you're given a spreadsheet, you probably will be given a homegrown spreadsheet, because every company has their own homegrown spreadsheets and they regard them as precious proprietary information. That's their intellectual property. So they get very upset and walk out with it. Those will be referring to codes and standards, and those codes and standards have probably changed since that Excel spreadsheet was written. And so they need to be kept up to date. What people don't realize, all these structural engineers don't realize they're actually being software engineers. And they need to put on the hat that they are a software engineer, and every piece of software I do needs to be checked. It needs to be validated and verified. And I've got a lecture on that, which you can find on the Daddy Pig YouTube channel. It's about V&V, validation verification, and that comes in about qualitative structural engineering, QSE, and that is seminar 2. Worth looking at, because what you need to do is get a feel for how buildings, how structures move when there are loads applied to them. And so you can do engineering without numbers. You don't need all the maths, you need intuition. So if you put a load in one direction, which way is the structure going to go? For beams, it's fairly obvious. For frames, not so much, particularly when we get into different modes of dynamic analysis and mode shapes, etc., which we'll be getting into, well, we won't be getting into. We'll go on to seismic design this afternoon and a brief look at certain things about seismic design. But this afternoon is more about the art of structural engineering, because we'll be looking at assessment. So as I say, structural engineering is more of an art than it is a science. Although we use scientific principles, we still need intuition, we still need imagination, and we still need a creative drive. So where does that come from? It doesn't come from the software, it's not coming from AI. It comes from you and you thinking up new ways of using material. But to do that, you need to know how materials have been used in the past and how materials work. Why do buildings stand up rather than fall down? And what happens in an earthquake? What happens under fire? What happens to your materials? So yes, coming back to the question is, if you're given a spreadsheet and it's got references to code of practice, they hope they will have put which version of the code of practice they've put in. And if not, you need to ask, because the code of practice changed. The greatest insult is the timber one. The timber code of practice is basically, they literally give you a whole load of correction sheets, which you physically cut out and glue in to your standard for timber. I don't know how they dare sell that, but they do. And it's way, way overdue for replacement, as is the steel standard, way, way overdue for replacement. When I arrived 2019, I was met by my former colleague, Stephen Hicks, who was working at HERA, and they just announced they were going to do a joint Australia-New Zealand standard for steel products. Still waiting. That should be out. It's the standards making process is very long and very slow, very tedious, but mainly because it relies on voluntary work. Nobody wants to pay for these standards, and so you get this situation where the government, in the form of MBIE, are in charge of the building code, and they go, well, I like that bit of standard, but I don't like that bit of standard. And not everything is in a code. That's what you've got to realize. And the code is not always right. There's loads of mistakes in the standards, by the way. And you only find out the hard way. that the standards are wrong. Some typographical errors are going to get people killed because they've turned a subscript into a superscript. You know, that's a big change in that case. Okay.